The task force was given the name Operation Brightfall, and its command was handed to Captain Nathan Cole. Cole was 44 years old, born in a small town in Ohio that he had not visited in over 20 years. He was not a loud man. He did not give roaring speeches or pound tables. He spoke quietly, thought carefully, and made decisions with the kind of calm that made the people around him believe that everything would be fine, even when it clearly would not be. He had fought in the Titan insurrection and the border skirmishes with the Drenari Collective, and he had earned his reputation not through glory, but through the simple fact that the people who served under him tended to come home alive. His ship was the UES Resolute, a Valkyrie-class assault carrier, and one of the most powerful vessels in Earth's young fleet. She was not elegant. She was built like a fist, heavy and armored, designed to take punishment and keep fighting. Her flight decks could launch hundreds of drop pods and assault shuttles, and her weapons batteries could crack the hull of any ship in known space. The strike group assigned to Cole consisted of 12 ships in total. The Resolute served as the flagship. 3 destroyers accompanied her: the UES Blackhawk, the UES Steadfast, and the UES Iron Ridge, each one fast and heavily armed. 4 frigates provided escort and screening. 2 electronic warfare corvettes, small and nimble, carried the most advanced jamming and deception equipment Earth had ever built. And 2 rapid troop transports carried the heart of the entire operation, the 9th Marine Expeditionary Unit. 3,000 Marines, 3,000 men and women trained for exactly this kind of mission. Drop from orbit, hit the ground hard, fight in any environment, protect civilians, get everyone out. The 9th MEU was commanded by Colonel Danielle Marsh. She was 39, a compact woman with sharp brown eyes and dark hair she kept cut short. She had grown up on a farm in Virginia, and there was still something of that rural practicality in the way she approached warfare. She did not believe in complicated plans. She believed in clear objectives, fast movement, and trusting her people to do their jobs. Her Marines loved her because she never asked them to do anything she would not do herself, and because she had a habit of appearing at the worst part of the fighting, exactly when her presence was needed most. Her senior officers were hand-picked. Lieutenant Kyle Greer led the 2nd Platoon of Alpha Company. He was 28, tall and broad-shouldered, with an easy grin that made people like him instantly. He was the kind of leader who remembered every name, who checked on his people when they were quiet, and who fought like something out of a nightmare when the shooting started. His platoon would follow him anywhere, and everyone who had served with him knew it. Lieutenant Cora Bennett led the reconnaissance and sniper detachment. She was the opposite of Greer in almost every way. She was small, quiet, and still. She spoke only when she had something worth saying, and she moved through terrain like a ghost. She had the highest confirmed engagement count in the 9th MEU, and she had earned it, not through aggression, but through patience. She would wait for hours, perfectly motionless, for a single, clear shot. Her team called her Shadow, and they meant it with deep respect. The fleet departed from the Ceres staging point on a cold Monday morning. The jump to faster-than-light speed was smooth, and the ships settled into their transit formation for the 9-day journey to Velara. 9 days. That was how long the Velari had to hold on. During the transit, Cole and Marsh spent nearly every waking hour in the Resolute's planning room. The intelligence they had on the Velara situation was painfully thin. Earth had almost no data on the Korath military. They did not know the exact number or position of enemy ships in orbit. They did not know where the Korath ground forces were concentrated. They did not even know the precise location of the Velari survivors underground. What they did know was the math, and the math was terrible. The Korath fleet outnumbered them roughly 4-1 in space. On the ground, the ratio was worse. 70,000 Korath soldiers against 3,000 Marines. That was more than 20-1. Cole stood before his officers in the briefing room on the third day of transit. The room was quiet. Every face was serious. He looked at them and spoke plainly. "We are not here to win a war," he said. "We cannot beat the Korath in a straight fight, and we all know it. What we can do is hit them fast, hit them hard, and make them so confused that by the time they figure out what is happening, we are already gone with the people we came to save. Speed and violence of action. That is our entire strategy." The plan was built around deception and aggression. The two electronic warfare corvettes would jump into the Velara system ahead of the main fleet. Their job was to flood Korath communications with false signals. Ghost fleets, appearing on sensors. Phantom energy signatures that looked like massive warships. Fabricated transmissions in multiple languages, suggesting that a huge allied armada from the Galactic Concord was approaching. None of it was real, but the Korath would not know that, at least not right away. In the chaos and confusion, Cole's strike group would punch through the orbital blockade at the weakest point, which intelligence suggested was over the northern polar region. They would establish temporary control of the space above the northern continent, and in that narrow window, they would drop every Marine they had to the surface. Marsh would lead the ground assault personally. Her Marines would secure the area around the mountain tunnels, push back the Korath ground forces, locate the Velarei survivors, and guide them to the troop transports waiting in the eastern valley. The entire ground operation needed to be completed in under 16 hours. After that, the Korath fleet would have reorganized, and Cole's ships would not be able to hold orbit any longer. 16 hours to save 200,000 people. On the 9th day, the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Velara system. The crews went to battle stations. Weapons were armed. Marines checked their armor, their weapons, and their ammunition one final time. Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute, looking at the distant blue dot that was Velara on the main display screen. Somewhere down there, people were dying in the dark. He picked up the ship-wide communicator and spoke to every soul in his fleet. "You all know why we are here. There are people on that planet who have been abandoned by everyone they ever trusted. They have been told that no one is coming, that rescue is impossible. We are going to prove them wrong. Do your jobs, take care of each other, and let us bring those people home." He set down the communicator and gave the order. The corvettes jumped ahead into the system. 30 seconds later, Cole's strike group followed. The operation had begun, and there was no turning back. Commander Dreth Vakon had not expected trouble. For 11 months, his siege had gone exactly as planned. The Velarei had no fleet. The Galactic Concord had sent nothing but empty words. His officers had grown comfortable, rotating between light patrols and rest shifts, treating the blockade as a routine assignment. Some of them had even begun placing bets on how many more days the Velarei would last underground, before starvation forced a surrender. Then his sensor screens went insane. The electronic warfare corvettes hit the Korath communication network, like a hammer hitting glass. Hundreds of false contacts appeared on every sensor display in the Korath fleet. Ships that did not exist materialized on their screens in formations that looked terrifyingly real. Energy signatures that matched capital-class warships bloomed across the outer system. Intercepted transmissions in a dozen languages filled their communications channels, all of them discussing fleet movements, attack coordinates, and the arrival of a massive Concord strike force. Vacon's command deck erupted in chaos. Officers shouted over each other, trying to separate real signals from false ones. Captains across the fleet demanded orders. Some ships began moving without authorization, breaking formation, to intercept phantom threats that vanished as soon as they changed course. Vakon was no fool. He suspected deception almost immediately. But suspecting and knowing were different things, and he could not afford to be wrong. If even one of those contacts was real, If the Concorde had actually sent a battle fleet, then his ships needed to be in defensive positions. He made the only safe choice available to him. He ordered his fleet to regroup in a tight defensive formation around the planet's equatorial orbit, pulling ships away from the northern and southern polar zones to concentrate his strength. It was exactly what Nathan Cole had been counting on. The moment the Korath fleet shifted, a gap opened in the blockade over the northern hemisphere. It was not a large gap, and it would not stay open for long, but it was enough. Cole's strike group came through it at maximum speed, weapons already firing. The 3 destroyers led the charge. The Blackhawk, the Steadfast, and the Iron Ridge opened up with long-range kinetic bombardment, launching streams of dense metal projectiles at incredible velocity. 2 Korath cruisers that had been slow to reposition were caught in the barrage. The first one broke apart amidships, its hull splitting open like torn paper. The second lost its engine section and began spinning helplessly, venting atmosphere and flame. The frigates fanned out wide, creating a protective screen around the Resolute as she moved into position directly above the northern mountain range. Cole's gunners targeted Korath orbital platforms and surface-to-space batteries, hammering them with precise fire. For a few precious minutes, the sky above the teeth of Solhar belonged to Earth. Cole gave the order to drop. The Resolute's launch bays opened, and the sky filled with fire. Hundreds of Hammerfall-class drop pods shot downward, each one carrying 4 Marines in full combat armor. Behind them came the larger assault shuttles, carrying heavy weapons teams, medical units, and equipment. From the ground, it looked like a meteor shower. Hundreds of bright streaks cutting through the atmosphere, burning white and gold against the dark sky. Danielle Marsh was in the very first pod. She sat strapped into her seat with her 3 command squad members, feeling the violent shaking as the pod screamed through the atmosphere. The heat shields glowed so bright that orange light filled the tiny cabin. The noise was deafening. The pod's retro thrusters fired at the last moment, and the impact with the ground hit her like a truck, slamming her teeth together and compressing her spine. Then the pod walls blew outward, and she was on her feet, rifle up, boots on Valeron soil. All around her, pods were slamming into the ground. Marines poured out of them, forming up into their fire teams with practice speed. The landing zone was a rocky plateau on the western slope of the mountains, chosen because it was shielded from direct Korath artillery positions by a ridge of high peaks. Within minutes, hundreds of Marines were on the ground and moving. The Korath ground forces reacted faster than Marsh had hoped. The nearest garrison, a forward operating base about 4 kilometers south of the mountain range, scrambled its troops and sent them north at full speed. Korath soldiers were big and strong, encased in dark-powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through concrete, and they moved in rigid, disciplined columns. But they had never fought humans before. Kyle Greer's platoon made first contact with the Korath ground forces on the southern slope. The Korath came up the slope in a standard assault formation, a wide line of heavy infantry advancing steadily, relying on their armor and firepower to overwhelm whatever they found. What they found was 48 Marines dug into concealed positions along the ridgeline. Greer let them get close. He waited until the Korath were within 300 meters, close enough that his people could not miss. The Marines hit them from 3 directions at once, pouring concentrated fire into the flanks of the Korath formation. The Korath armor was tough, but human kinetic rifles fired tungsten penetrators at velocities that cracked it open. Soldiers that had felt invincible in their armor suddenly found themselves exposed and bleeding. The Korath tried to regroup, tried to form a defensive line, but the Marines did not give them time. Greer ordered an advance, and his fire teams leapfrogged forward in pairs, one team firing while the other moved. It was fast, fluid, and relentless. The Korath, trained for slow, grinding engagements against opponents who fought the same way they did, could not adapt to the speed of it. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the mountains, Cora Bennett and her 6-person reconnaissance team were moving through the darkness. Bennett had studied the scans of the tunnel network taken from orbit, incomplete as they were, and had identified a possible entry point on the eastern slope, a natural cave opening partially hidden by rockfall. Her team moved silently, picking their way through the rubble, using thermal sensors to avoid Korath patrols. They found the entrance and slipped inside. The tunnels were dark and cold, and the air smelled of stone and fear. Bennett's team moved carefully, checking for traps and sensors. The Korath had placed detection devices at several junction points, and Bennett disabled each one with quiet precision, cutting wires and spoofing signals so that they continued to show all clear to the Korath monitoring stations. After 2 kilometers of careful movement, they found the Velari. It was a large cavern, dimly lit by failing emergency lights. Hundreds of Velari civilians were huddled together on the stone floor. Children clung to their parents. The elderly sat motionless, staring at nothing. The entire cavern smelled of sickness and despair. When Bennett's team appeared at the entrance, armored figures emerging from the darkness, the Velari recoiled in terror. Some screamed. Others tried to run deeper into the tunnels. They thought the Korath had finally found them. Bennett stopped. She lowered her weapon and slowly reached up to remove her helmet. Her face appeared in the dim light, pale and human, with calm gray eyes. She knelt down to be less threatening and activated her translator unit. "My name is Cora Bennett," she said, her voice steady and gentle. "I am a soldier from the planet Earth. We received your distress signal. We are here to take you somewhere safe." There was silence. Then a figure moved through the crowd, a tall Velari woman, whose skin had gone almost white from exhaustion. It was Elder Counselor Mirath. She came forward slowly, looking at Bennett as if she were something impossible, something from a dream. "Earth," Mirath said. "We do not know this world." "Most of the galaxy does not," Bennett said, "but we are here." Mirath looked at the armored soldiers behind Bennett, at their weapons and their hard, determined faces. Then she looked back at the hundreds of frightened people behind her, the people she had tried so hard to protect, the people she had told that no one was coming. "How many of you are there?" Mirath asked. 3,000 on the ground, Bennett said. 12 ships in orbit. We have transports waiting in the Eastern Valley. We are going to walk your people out of these tunnels and take them off this planet. The Korath have 70,000 soldiers here. "Yes," Bennett said simply. "We know." Mirath stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in months, the color returned to her skin. A faint ripple of blue and silver. The Velari sign of hope. Colonel Marsh arrived at the eastern tunnel entrance 40 minutes later, having pushed forward from the landing zone with her command element. Mirath was brought to meet her. The 2 women stood face to face, the Velari elder towering over the human colonel. And Mirath asked the question that had been burning inside her since Bennett had first appeared in the darkness. "Why did you come? You owe us nothing. You have no treaty with us. You have no reason to be here." Marsh looked up at her. She was covered in dust and sweat, her armor scratched from the drop, her rifle still warm from the fighting on the western slope. "That is not how we see it," Marsh said. "Someone called for help. We answered. That is all the reason we need." The deception held for almost 2 hours. Then Commander Vakon figured it out. He was standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Wrath of Korath, watching his sensor officers chase phantom contacts across the system, when he noticed something. The ghost fleets never fired. They appeared, they moved, they broadcast signals, but none of them engaged his ships. Real fleets do not behave that way. Real fleets, upon arriving in a contested system, would immediately begin positioning for attack. These contacts were doing nothing but existing, and that was the tell. Vakon slammed his fist down on the command console and roared at his officers. It was a trick, all of it. While his fleet had been chasing shadows, someone had slipped through the blockade over the North Pole. He ordered an immediate sensor sweep of the Northern Hemisphere, and what he found made his blood run cold. A carrier, 3 destroyers, and support ships in orbit, and thousands of enemy soldiers already on the ground near the Velari tunnel network. He did not know who they were. He did not care. He redirected his entire fleet northward and sent orders to every ground garrison on the planet to converge on the mountain range. Whatever was happening down there was going to end, and it was going to end in blood. Nathan Cole saw them coming. The Resolute sensors tracked the Korath fleet as it broke from its defensive formation and surged toward the Northern Hemisphere. Hundreds of warships, many of them far larger than anything in Cole's task force, burning hard to close the distance. Cole had known this moment would come. The deception was always going to be temporary. The question was how long they could hold. The orbital battle became a desperate, ugly thing. Cole's 3 destroyers spread out to create a defensive perimeter, engaging the leading Korath ships at maximum range. The Black Hawk, commanded by Commander Patrick Hale, took the most exposed position on the left flank. Hale was 52 years old, a career Navy man with a thick gray beard and a reputation for never raising his voice, even when his ship was falling apart around him. He had volunteered for the flank position because he understood the math. Someone had to be the shield, and he had decided it would be him. The Black Hawk fought like something possessed. Her gunners poured fire into the approaching Korath formation, crippling a light cruiser and forcing 2 frigates to break off. But the numbers were overwhelming. A Korath torpedo barrage struck the Black Hawk amidships, and one of the torpedoes breached the reactor shielding. The explosion tore through 3 decks and killed half the crew in an instant. Fires erupted throughout the ship. The Black Hawk began to drift, bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds. Hale stood on his shattered bridge, surrounded by smoke and the bodies of his officers, and made a decision that took him less than 3 seconds. He ordered the surviving crew to the escape pods, all of them. He was not asking, he was telling. Then he took the helm himself. The Black Hawk still had engines. She still had a reactor, cracked and failing, but still burning. Hale pointed the crippled destroyer directly at the largest Korath ship in the formation, a dreadnought called the Fang of Vakon, and pushed the engines to full power. The Korath dreadnought tried to evade, but Hale had aimed well. The Black Hawk closed the distance in seconds, and Hale triggered the reactor overload at point-blank range. The explosion was visible from the surface of Velara. The Fang of Vakon broke apart, its entire forward section obliterated, secondary explosions rippling through its hull as it split in 2 and began falling toward the planet in pieces. Patrick Hale and the 14 crew members who had stayed with him to keep the ship running were gone. On the ground, the situation was just as savage. The Korath poured reinforcements toward the mountains from every direction. Thousands of soldiers in heavy armor advanced through the foothills, supported by armored vehicles and mobile artillery platforms. Marsh's Marines held a shrinking perimeter around the tunnel exits and the landing zone in the Eastern Valley, where the 2 troop transports sat with their ramps down, waiting for civilians who were still kilometers away underground. Kyle Greer and his platoon were given the hardest job. The mountain pass called Harrow's Gate was the only route wide enough for the Korath to bring their armored vehicles through. If the Korath pushed vehicles into the eastern valley, the transports would be destroyed and the evacuation would be over. Greer's 48 Marines were ordered to hold that pass and let nothing through. The first Korath assault came within the hour. 200 soldiers with armored support advanced through the narrow pass, confident that their numbers and firepower would crush whatever small force was waiting for them. Greer let them enter the pass and then triggered the ambush. His teams opened fire from elevated positions on both sides, pouring concentrated fire down into the column. The narrow walls of the pass turned it into a killing ground. The Korath could not spread out, could not flank, could not use their numbers. They fell back, leaving burning vehicles and dead soldiers behind them. They came again 20 minutes later, with more troops, and again after that, with even more. Each time, Greer's Marines threw them back, but each attack cost them. Marines were hit. Ammunition was consumed. Greer himself took a piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder during the third assault, a jagged piece of metal that buried itself deep in the muscle. The medic wanted to pull him back, but Greer shook his head, let them bandage it, and went back to the line. The fourth assault was the worst. The Korath sent over 500 soldiers, supported by 2 heavy tanks. Greer's anti-armor weapons took out one tank at the mouth of the pass, blocking the other behind the wreckage. But the infantry kept coming, climbing over the burning hull and pushing forward by sheer weight of numbers. The fighting became close, desperate, and personal. Marines and Korath soldiers fired at each other from distances so short that the muzzle flashes lit up their faces. Greer was hit again, a plasma bolt that burned across his ribs and seared through his body armor. The pain was blinding, but he stayed on his feet. He grabbed his communicator and called the Resolute in orbit, requesting kinetic fire support on his own position. The officer on the other end hesitated. Danger-close kinetic strikes meant that the heavy projectiles from orbit would impact so close to friendly positions that Greer's own people could be killed by the shockwaves. "I understand the risk," Greer said through clenched teeth. "Drop it on the pass entrance, now." The kinetic rounds came down like the fist of a god. The impacts shook the entire mountain, throwing Korath and human soldiers alike off their feet. The mouth of the pass collapsed in a cloud of dust and rubble, burying the advancing Korath troops and sealing the approach. Greer's Marines picked themselves up, bleeding and battered, and found that the pass was blocked. 48 Marines held Harrow's Gate for 6 hours against more than 1,000 Korath soldiers. Inside the tunnels, the evacuation was a slow, terrible race against time. Bennett and her team guided groups of Valeri civilians through the underground passages toward the eastern exit. The tunnels were narrow, dark, and partially collapsed in places. The Valeri moved slowly, weakened by months of starvation. Children had to be carried. The elderly had to be supported. Medical teams worked in the darkness, giving emergency nutrition packs and hydration to the weakest so they could keep moving. Bennett was leading the last major group, nearly 4,000 civilians, through a deep section of the tunnel network, when her point scout signaled a halt. Something was ahead of them. Bennett moved forward silently and found what she had feared. A Korath infiltration team, 9 soldiers, had entered the tunnels from a different access point and set up an ambush at a junction ahead. They were waiting in the dark, weapons ready, positioned to slaughter the civilians as they came through. Bennett had 4 people. The Korath had 9, and they were dug in. The junction was narrow with almost no cover. She positioned her team at the corners of the passage, took a breath, and initiated the ambush before the Korath could spring theirs. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. In the confined space of the tunnel, it was deafening and chaotic. Bennett's team fired with precision, each shot aimed and deliberate. The Korath fired back wildly, their plasma bolts scorching the tunnel walls and filling the air with superheated stone fragments. Bennett took a round through her left hand, the bolt punching clean through her palm and shattering 2 bones. She switched her rifle to her right hand, braced it against the tunnel wall, and kept firing. When it was over, all 9 Korath soldiers were dead. Bennett wrapped her ruined hand in a field bandage, picked up her weapon, and led the civilians the remaining 2 kilometers to the eastern exit without saying a word about the pain. The evacuation took 14 hours. 187,000 Velari civilians were moved out of the tunnels and onto the troop transports. 14 hours of constant movement, constant fighting, and constant fear. During those 14 hours, the Marines lost 212 killed and over 500 wounded. Every single wounded Marine who could still hold a weapon refused evacuation and stayed on the line. Cole, watching from orbit while his ships fought and burned around him, ran the numbers one final time. The Korath fleet was closing in. His defensive perimeter was collapsing. He had maybe 3 hours before the Korath achieved total orbital control and his ships would be destroyed. He sent a message to Marsh on the surface. "You have 2 hours, then we leave, with or without everyone aboard. I am sorry, Danielle. That is all I can give you." Marsh read the message, looked at the stream of civilians still filing onto the transports, and replied with 6 words. "We will be ready. Trust me." She was ready in 84 minutes. The transports launched under fire. The 2 massive ships lifted off from the eastern valley, their engines roaring, their hulls shaking as they clawed their way upward through Velara's atmosphere. Inside them, 187,000 Velari civilians sat packed together in cargo holds that had been hastily converted into passenger compartments. Blankets had been laid on the metal floors. Water stations had been set up along the walls. Medical teams moved through the crowds, treating the sick, feeding the starving, and wrapping the wounded. Children pressed their faces to the small viewport windows and watched the planet they had been born on shrink below them. The last Marines boarded the transports in the final minutes. They came running across the landing zone in small groups, falling back from their defensive positions in a coordinated withdrawal that Marsh had choreographed down to the second. The perimeter collapsed inward like a closing fist, each fire team covering the retreat of the team behind it, until the last soldiers sprinted up the ramps and the doors sealed shut behind them. Greer was carried aboard on a stretcher, finally allowing the medics to take him after 6 hours of refusing to leave the line. He had lost a significant amount of blood from his shoulder wound and the plasma burn across his ribs, and his face was gray with exhaustion, but he was conscious, and as the medics loaded him into the transport, he looked up at Marsh and said, "Pass held, Colonel." "I know it did," Marsh said. "Get some rest." Bennett walked aboard under her own power, her left hand wrapped in bandages that were already soaked through with blood. She had not mentioned the wound to anyone outside her team. A medic tried to guide her to a treatment area, and she shook her head and said she would wait until the civilians had been seen to first. She sat down against a bulkhead wall, cradled her rifle in her good hand, and closed her eyes. In orbit, Cole was fighting the most desperate battle of his career. The Korath fleet had fully reorganized and was closing in from multiple directions. The Resolute's shields were failing. The Iron Ridge had taken heavy damage to her weapon systems and was operating at half capacity. The Steadfast had lost her port engine array when a Korath torpedo struck her engineering section, and for several terrifying minutes, she had tumbled toward the atmosphere before her crew managed to restart the remaining engines and pull her back into formation. Cole's remaining frigates formed a tight escort around the 2 transports as they climbed out of the gravity well. Korath interceptors, small and fast attack craft, dove at the transports from above, trying to destroy them before they could reach orbit. The frigates shot them down one by one, their point defense guns filling the space between the ships with streams of fire. 2 interceptors got through the screen, and the Resolute's secondary batteries destroyed them less than a kilometer from the nearest transport. The fleet turned for the FTL jump point and ran. It was not a clean escape. It was a running fight across 200,000 kilometers of contested space, with the Korath fleet in full pursuit behind them. Cole's ships were faster, but they were damaged, and the Korath were pushing hard, closing the distance slowly but steadily. The electronic warfare corvettes, battered and running low on power, continued to broadcast jamming signals and false contacts, trying to confuse the Korath targeting systems and buy extra seconds of life for the fleet. 47 minutes. That was how long the running battle lasted. 47 minutes of constant fire, constant maneuvering, and constant tension. Cole stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the tactical display, tracking the distance to the jump point as it slowly, painfully counted down. His ship shuddered with every hit it took. Warning alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in from every section. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Fire in the port weapons bay. Shield generators at 12%. When they reached the jump point, Cole gave one final order. He turned the Resolute broadside to the pursuing Korath fleet and fired everything. Every weapon on the ship, every missile, every kinetic round, every energy battery, all at once. In Earth naval doctrine, it was called a thunder wall, a single massive barrage designed not to destroy, but to overwhelm, to create a wall of destruction so dense that the enemy had no choice but to stop and evade. The thunder wall hit the leading Korath pursuit squadron head-on. 3 ships were destroyed outright. The rest scattered, breaking formation to avoid the debris field. It bought 60 seconds. 60 seconds was enough. The transports jumped first, vanishing into the blue-white flash of faster-than-light travel. Then the escorts, one by one. Then the damaged Steadfast, limping but holding together. Then the Iron Ridge. And finally, the Resolute herself, her hull blackened and torn, fires burning along her port side, made the jump just as a volley of Korath torpedoes reached the empty space where she had been a heartbeat before. They were gone. 9 days later, the fleet emerged at the Ceres staging point in Earth's solar system. The sight that greeted the Velari refugees was something none of them had ever imagined. A planet, then another, then moons, all belonging to a species they had never heard of. Medical ships were already waiting. Supply vessels moved alongside the transports and began transferring food, water, and medicine. Small shuttles carried doctors and counselors to the transport decks. Earth had prepared. In the 9 days since the fleet's departure, temporary settlements had been constructed on the moons Europa and Titan. Heated shelters, medical facilities, schools. Teams of human volunteers had begun learning the Velari language from the limited databases available. Psychologists who specialized in trauma care had been briefed and were ready. Agricultural experts had studied Velari dietary needs and had prepared food that the refugees could safely eat. The Velari stepped off the transports in long, quiet lines, blinking in the light of an unfamiliar sun. Many of them wept. Some of them simply stood and stared, unable to believe that they were safe, unable to understand the kindness of strangers who had crossed 52 light-years to save them. The cost of Operation Brightfall was carved in grief. 212 Marines killed, 31 Navy personnel lost, including Commander Patrick Hale and the 14 sailors who had stayed with him on the Black Hawk. The Black Hawk herself destroyed. Over 500 wounded, many of them carrying injuries they would feel for the rest of their lives. The names of the dead were read aloud at Fleet Command in a ceremony that lasted nearly an hour. Admiral Holloway stood at the podium and read each name personally, pausing after each one. The silence in the hall was absolute. The Galactic Concord reacted with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and shame. No species in the recorded history of the galaxy had ever done what Earth had just done. Intervention on behalf of a species with whom they shared no treaty, no trade, no alliance, no strategic interest. The diplomatic channels buzzed with questions. Several Concord species accused Earth of reckless warmongering. Others, more quietly, wondered what it said about their own civilizations that they had refused to act, while a species they considered primitive had not hesitated. The Korath Dominion filed a formal diplomatic protest with the Concord, calling Earth's actions unprovoked military aggression against a sovereign operation. Earth's ambassador to the Concord, a calm and measured woman named Laura Voss, responded during an open session of the Concord Assembly. "We received a distress signal from a civilian population being systematically destroyed," she said. "We responded. If the Korath Dominion considers the protection of innocent lives to be an act of aggression, then they and this assembly have a very different understanding of that word than we do." The assembly chamber was silent for a long time after she finished speaking. 1 month later, Elder Counselor Mirath was invited to address the full Concord Assembly. She had spent the weeks since the rescue, recovering on Europa, regaining her strength, and learning about the strange, fierce species that had saved her people. She had visited the wounded Marines in the medical wards. She had sat beside Kyle Greer's bed while he recovered from surgery, and listened to him talk about his hometown in Georgia with the same easy warmth he showed everyone. She had watched Cora Bennett undergo reconstructive surgery on her shattered hand, and had been struck by how little the quiet woman complained. Mirath stood before the assembly, a chamber filled with representatives of over 200 spacefaring species. Her skin glowed with a deep, steady blue, the Velari color of conviction. She told them about the siege. She told them about the starvation, the collapsing tunnels, the children who stopped crying because they no longer had the energy for tears. She told them about the 41 distress signals she had sent, and the 40 responses she had received, each one a polite refusal. Then she told them about the day the sky burned, the day armored figures fell from the heavens, landed in the dirt, and started fighting for people they had never met. She told them about a woman named Cora Bennett, who knelt in a dark tunnel, took off her helmet, and said 4 simple words: "We are here now." She told them about a young man named Kyle Greer, who held a mountain pass for 6 hours with a piece of metal in his shoulder, because the people behind him could not defend themselves. She told them about a ship captain named Patrick Hale, who gave his life to destroy a warship that threatened strangers from a world he had never visited. "We sent 41 calls for help," Mirath said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. 40 species heard our cries. 40 species told us they were sorry. One species came. She paused and let the silence settle over the assembly. "They were the youngest among you. The ones you dismissed as primitive and aggressive. The ones you said were too small and too new to matter. And they were the only ones who remembered what civilization is supposed to mean." She stepped back from the podium, and no one spoke for a very long time. On Earth, a new memorial wall was built at Fleet Command. It was made of dark stone, polished smooth, and it bore the names of every person who had died during Operation Brightfall. Captain Cole attended the dedication in his dress uniform. Standing beside Danielle Marsh, Kyle Greer with his arm still in a sling, and Cora Bennett with her hand wrapped in regenerative bandages. Admiral Holloway stood at the front and said a few quiet words about duty and sacrifice, and the kind of courage that does not ask for permission or reward. None of the survivors spoke to the press afterward. They did not need to. The names on the wall spoke for themselves, and the 187,000 lives those names had purchased spoke louder still. At the base of the memorial, a single line was engraved into the stone. Admiral Holloway had chosen it herself. and she had chosen it because it was simple and true, and it said everything that needed to be said about why a small young species from a quiet planet had sent its sons and daughters across the stars to die for strangers. It read, "They called for help. We answered." The planet Valara had been burning for 11 months. From orbit, it still looked beautiful. It was a world of blue oceans and green forests, with silver cities that caught the light of its twin suns. But from the surface, the beauty was gone. The capital city of Solhaven, once home to 3 million souls, was nothing more than broken towers and blackened ground. The crystal bridges that had connected its floating gardens now hung in shattered pieces over empty craters. The air smelled of smoke and chemical fire, and the wind carried the dust of everything the Valari people had built over 10,000 years of peace. The Korath Dominion had come without warning. 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and filled the sky like a dark cloud. Commander Dreth Vakon, a tall and scarred reptilian officer with cold yellow eyes, had given the Valari a simple choice: surrender everything, hand over their technology, their resources, their world, or die. The Valari were not fighters. They had never been fighters. They were a gentle species, slender and graceful, with soft, iridescent skin that shifted color with their emotions. They were scholars who studied the stars. They were artists who sculpted light itself. They were healers whose medical knowledge was admired across a dozen star systems. When they had joined the Galactic Concord 2 centuries ago, they believed that membership in that great alliance of species would keep them safe forever. They were wrong. When the Korath came, Elder Counselor Mirath, one of the highest leaders of the Valari governing circle, sent distress signals to every member world of the Galactic Concord. She sent 41 messages in total, each one a desperate plea for help. The responses came back slowly, and they all said the same thing in different words. "We are sorry. The Korath are too powerful. Your world is too far away. We cannot risk our own people for yours. We wish you well." Wishes did not stop bombs. The Korath ground forces numbered 70,000 soldiers. They were big creatures, heavily built, with thick scaled skin and powerful limbs. They wore powered armor that made them even larger, and they carried weapons that could melt stone. They swept across the surface of Valara with terrible efficiency, destroying cities, burning farmland, and rounding up anyone who did not flee fast enough. Mirath organized the retreat. She gathered every survivor she could reach and led them north, away from the burning plains, into the ancient mountain range called the Teeth of Solhar. Deep beneath those mountains, carved into the rock by Valari ancestors thousands of years ago, was a network of tunnels and caverns. It was cold, dark, and cramped, but it was hidden. Nearly 200,000 Valari civilians crowded into those tunnels, carrying whatever they could hold in their arms. The elderly sat in silence, too exhausted for tears. Food was running out. The water recyclers were old and failing. The Korath had begun using seismic charges, massive explosions designed to shake the mountains themselves and collapse the tunnels from above. Every few hours, the ground would tremble, dust would fall from the ceiling, and somewhere in the network, another passage would slam shut under tons of broken rock. Mirath stood before the survivors in the largest cavern, a natural chamber lit by dim emergency lights. Her skin, normally a calm shade of silver blue, had gone pale with exhaustion and grief. She told them the truth because she believed they deserved it. There was no more food coming. The outer tunnels were collapsing. No one was coming to save them. She watched the hope leave their eyes, and it broke something inside her. 52 light-years away, in a completely different part of the galaxy, a small communications relay belonging to the United Earth Naval Command picked up one of Mirath's distress signals. It was faint, distorted by distance, and buried among thousands of other signals passing through that sector of space. But the relay's automated systems flagged it because it contained a universal distress code, a frequency that every spacefaring species recognized as a cry for help. The signal was translated and forwarded to the Office of Strategic Operations at Fleet Command, a massive orbital station circling Mars. It landed on the desk of Admiral Grace Holloway on a Tuesday morning. Holloway was 61 years old, with short gray hair and the kind of steady, quiet authority that came from 35 years of military service. A species called the Valari, on a planet called Valara, under siege by something called the Korath Dominion. Civilians trapped underground, starvation imminent, all requests for help from the Galactic Concord denied. Earth was not a member of the Galactic Concord. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel 19 years ago. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, humans were newcomers, barely worth noticing. The older species looked at Earth the way adults might look at a loud, clumsy child who had just stumbled into a room full of important people. Humans were considered aggressive, emotional, and unrefined. They had no treaties with the Valari. They had no trade agreements. They had absolutely no strategic reason to get involved. Holloway flagged the report and sent it to the United Earth Council. Within 72 hours, the Council convened an emergency session. The debate was not long. The politicians argued about risks and resources, about the message it would send to the galactic community, about whether Earth could afford to pick a fight with a major power like the Korath. But in the end, one voice cut through all the noise. Councilman Levi Dunn, a former Marine who still carried shrapnel in his left knee from a deployment on Titan, stood up and spoke plainly. He did not give a fancy speech. He said that somewhere out there, 200,000 people were huddled in the dark, starving, waiting to die, because every single species in their alliance had decided that helping them was too expensive. He said that Earth had just become aware of the situation, and that awareness came with a responsibility. He said that if humanity could not look at a situation like that and act, then they did not deserve the stars they had reached for. We do not need a treaty to do the right thing, he said. The vote passed. Admiral Holloway received the authorization at 3 a.m, Mars time. She sat alone in her office, looking out the viewport at the red planet below, and began writing the orders that would send Earth soldiers across 52 light-years of space to fight for people they had never met.